Colleagues, with regard to the 2006 Maritime Labour Convention and the subcommittee on the subsidiary legislation to commence the requirements of the 2006 MLC in Hong Kong is the appointed time, and we have already formed a quorum. So first, let's elect the chairman. Any nominations? Yes, I'd like to nominate you, Mr. James Toh. All right, Mr. Frankie Yik has seconded. All right, I accept the nomination. No further nomination. Do we need to have a deputy chairman? No need. Okay, so let's invite the administration team to join us.
So I was hesitating. I was wondering if it should be 2016 instead of 2006 with regard to the MLC.
好，咁多位官員早晨啊。咁咧，首先咧就
All right, let's call the meeting to order. Let's introduce the administration team. We have Ms. Louisa Yan, Principal Assistant Secretary for Transport and Housing, and Mr. Cheng Young Ming, Assistant Director from the Marine Department, Mr. Chen Ming Yao, General Manager, Shipping Registry and Seafarers, and from the DFJ, we have Ms. Mabel Cheung, Senior Assistant Law Draftsman. Over to Ms. Yan and her team. Please introduce us to the legislation. All right, we only have 3 members, and just now my impression was that earlier on you went to the panel to introduce the subsidiary legislation. So please be brief in your introduction, because we all have the backgrounds. All members of the subcommittee are very familiar with the proposed legislation. Chairman, I'll briefly walk you through the commencement notice and also the 2 amendment regulations and the details. Well, in fact, with regard to the 2006 MLC, which will be extended and commenced in Hong Kong on the 20th of December 2018, and therefore we have to bring into operation the relevant subsidiary legislation, because in the wake of that, we have introduced some local legislation, including the Merchant Shipping Seafarers Ordinance Cap 478, and also the Administrative Appeals Board Ordinance Cap 442, with regard to a schedule concerning the commencement of the MLC, as the convention has not been extended to Hong Kong back then. That's why we have to introduce this commencement notice, as it's going to be extended to Hong Kong formally on the 20th of December. That's why we have to introduce the 12 commencement notices. And also, on top of that, we are also coming up with 2 amendment regulations, because back in 2016, concerning this convention, with regard to subsidiary legislation under Cap 478, we submitted some subsidiary legislation to this council for scrutiny, and a subcommittee was set up to scrutinize those 2 regulations. But then, with regard to a non-signatory, if they like to recruit seafarers, the contract has to be seen and scrutinized by the worker, and there's a chance for him to seek advice on the agreement before entering into it. Well, after members looked into that, they hope that there can be express provision in order to be more effective in terms of protection for the seafarers. We agree to those comments. That's why we promised that once the subsidiary legislation is to enter into force, we will seek further amendment to that. That's why on this occasion we are introducing relevant amendments in order to reflect the deliberation by the then subcommittee. That's why we have introduced further legislative proposals, and on the 20th of December, the convention is going to be extended to Hong Kong, and we've already notified the local industry and also the relevant parties in Hong Kong. We are confident that before the 20th of December, all the vessels will be able to follow the relevant provisions. Thank you. All right, colleagues. Chairman, we'd like to understand further
information, and in fact we have already asked similar questions before. So how many people will be affected by the relevant legislation? How many seafarers are there in Hong Kong? So we'd like to know the implication of the legislation. Thank you. Yes. Yes, Assistant Director. Yes, thank you. Well, we have 53,000 registered under the registry, and some 30,000 are Chinese seafarers. Others would be from India and Philippines. And the Philippines, in Hong Kong, we have about 200. But then the legislation would mean that for the overall requirements would cover all seafarers here, and therefore all will benefit. The second question is that, some conventions will be involved in this, and the PRC is also a signatory to the convention. So I'd like to know, initially, when you decided to extend the convention to Hong Kong, were representatives from our country present, and also did we send a delegation to follow the state delegation to such convention meetings? Because in the end, I'd like to know whether or not we have a full understanding of the implications of such convention to Hong Kong. Yes, Mr. Chang, thank you for your questions. Back in 2006, when the convention was discussed or agreed by Geneva, that is the ILO, I was there, and of course, our delegation followed the leader of Mr. Xu, the Minister for Transport, and over 100 signatories were present, and in the end, the Vice Minister also went up to the stage to make a statement. He also hoped that legislation could be introduced as soon as possible. In the end, on the 12th of November 2016, domestic legislation was introduced in China, but then Hong Kong was also represented there. We had representatives from both the industry and also from the government being present. Well, I don't think the substance of the proposed legislation is controversial at all. But then I understand that with regard to the trade, they also do not have any objection to this, and this legislation is just to make sure that the terms of the convention will be formally implemented in Hong Kong. So I'd like to know, with regard to what they have been doing, and also after the enactment of the legislation, what difference will there be? So what are the areas that they will have to pay special attention to after the enactment of the legislation or the commencement of the legislation in Hong Kong? With regard to official logbook, well, you will have to properly log down everything in the official logbook. So the main amendments would be that in terms of the entries that are required right now, it's not just it's not about the format. It's about the substance. It's about the entries. So I can give you some examples. For instance, you will have to check the potable water, and also the stores, and also the handling provisions. So you will have to inspect the stores. So you will have to enter in the logbook as to the regular inspection that has been carried out, and also the certain claims by the seafarers. All these will have to be entered into the logbooks. These are the latest additions. With regard to revisions, because the law does require that, for the pilot, when he embarks the vessel, certain things will have to be done, but then the maritime, the International Maritime Organization did say that that would be sort of dangerous. That's why that has been taken away. So the main thing is about whether or not the traders understand this and are they aware of the implications and so on. Yes, we have already done consultation with them, because sometimes the administration might have thought that you have already done adequate consultation, and yet those in the trade might not have been aware of that. So it's about food waste. You will have to properly process it before it's disposed of. So sometimes the practitioners might not be aware of that. So you might have talked to some of those from the association, but then when they go back, they might not have sent out a message loud and clear to the operators, and therefore you will have to publish leaflets. You will also have to use language commonly understood by the traders, so the chambers of commerce will be the best agents to send out the message, because if there is any violation, there will be penalties. So that's the most important thing. So we don't want them to inadvertently break the law. All right, thank you for your suggestion. We'll go back to step up publicity, but then with regard to the official logbook, the OLB is issued by the Marine Department to individual shipping company. And whenever there is a new vessel, we will issue this to them. And we will also be informing them as to what they are expected to fill in the OLBs. Yes, my follow-up question is, well, to follow on with what Mr. Ho just asked, with regard to the commencement regulations and so on, well, what you need to do is that many people will have to collaborate in order to comply with the relevant legislation. And of course, the most important thing is the captain on board of the vessel and also the management on board of the vessel. But then, these are international conventions, and all jurisdictions will have to follow. So it has nothing to do with the individual jurisdictions. And on our part, we have to ensure that seafarers departing from Hong Kong will follow that. We're talking about tens of thousands of people, and you're requiring each and every one of them to follow the requirements, and they will have to understand their duties.
坦白講，
So you have been preparing for this for a long time. How can you make sure that this tens of thousands of people will comply with these rules? Of course, these people are seafarers. They may have to go through trainings. However, some seafarers may have stayed at home for several years and then they go back onto vessels. So how can you ensure that all of them know roughly that these regulations have been amended? Well, for lawyers like us, this is called continuing professional development. But do you have such a system for them so that they know the latest changes? Because these changes are quite significant. Well, for MLC, it actually took effect on the 20th of August 2013. That means all the signatories would have to observe it. If a vessel doesn't belong to that signatory and is in the waters of that signatory, it may have to be asked to stay there. So in 2013, we used some administrative measures, and through the classification societies, we issued certificates. The shipping companies at that time already understood the requirements of the MLC, and now we are in 2018 already, and we've heard that the compliance certificates have been followed appropriately, and there has not been major incidents involving seafarers who didn't know about the latest requirements. So if the vessels have these certificates and the farers know what's going on, then there will be no problem. What you mean is that even though some seafarers haven't been working on board of vessels for several years and now they go back to work, you believe that the companies that hire them will make sure that they understand? Well, the ship owners have the responsibility to make sure that his seafarers comply with all the regulations, including the MLC. So they must have a mechanism. And also there are other seafarers on board. And we for the captains and the chief engineers, etc., they have to renew their licenses every 5 years. So they will make sure that they know the latest situation. So for the tens of thousands of people who have registered as seafarers, are they required to understand the latest law before they can renew their license? Well, on board of vessels, we have an international safety management system. We require the vessels to comply with all the international conventions. So shipping companies will require their staff to be trained for this. I'm talking about the license you issue. Maybe I supplement, Chairman. For MLC is to regulate for the working and living conditions, the size of the crew accommodation, etc. And what you're talking now is about the training of seafarers. Now, you may be concerned that if a seafarer hasn't been working on a vessel for quite some time, is his training up to standard, and can he help the passengers to abandon the ship in case there's any accident? So there is a piece of legislation called STCW, and also CAP 478, the Merchant Shipping Seafarers Ordinance, is also a piece of legislation that they should follow. So for seafarers, they have to be trained and they have to take examinations before they go on board of a vessel. This is to ensure that they know all the latest regulations, including the MLC. Mr. Yik? Well, for this piece of legislation, this is to regulate shipping companies. So you have to provide all these to the seafarers, etc. So for big liners, I understand that they are really law-abiding, but for businessmen, some of them may not abide by the law. So the chairman asked, how can the government make sure that the seafarers can get all their benefits and welfare, and how can they keep abreast with the latest knowledge? In particular, if some of them haven't been working for several years. So when they go on board again, how can we make sure that they know the latest laws? Well, just now Ms. Yan told us about another system which can ensure that. And in Hong Kong, we also have a serious seafarers association. I don't know if all seafarers in Hong Kong are members of this association. If that is so, that would be good, because the association will be there to protect its members, and from time to time relevant information will be disseminated to their members through their own channels. So is there such a mechanism? Well, for our Seafarers Association, we work with them when we do our legislative work, and there is an MNOSG, and there are guilds, and we also have AUS. So all these associations know about the latest developments. Now, back to Mr. Stephen Ho's question. This is a problem. Now, I know that for the government, sometimes you will work through advisory committees and consultative groups, but they may have heard your views, but they do not spread your information to their members, and sometimes there may be rumors and misunderstandings. Well, the advisory body members may think that they are just there to give their views to the government. They do not have the responsibility to disseminate the messages to their members. Yeah, so how can we make sure that the people affected will know about this new information? I think it's the government's responsibility. In March 2013, the Marine Department has already been issuing compliance certificates to vessels through the classification societies. And for the MLC, there is a requirement that is about qualifications of seafarers. The ship owners would have the responsibility to look at that. Now, for the certificates, there are 3 parts. For the first part, is about the qualification of the seafarers, and for the second part, the ship owner would have to fill in. That is about the training of seafarers, and for the third part, it's called a maritime labor certificate. It's issued by classification societies. So we have been monitoring this for 5 years. There have been no problems. All the seafarers know about the latest requirements, and the shipping companies would have to comply with these rules. So a vessel has to go on to the sea to operate. Otherwise, it's meaningless if it's berthed all the time. A ship owner doesn't want a ship to be berthed. It has to work. So to ensure that the ship would work and operate, the seafarers would have to be trained. Now, for overseas ships, when they come to Hong Kong, the Marine Department is responsible for our waters management. So would you go on board to check whether they have done everything according to the MLC and their work training records intact, etc., then this can be ensured. I'm not saying it's only your responsibility. All the countries should have the responsibility. In 2013, when it was on trial, I went on board ships. I talked to the captains, and then I checked the seafarers training certificates and whether such certificates are valid. Now we have to check the 16 items, so we won't miss anything. For example, if a license is forged, we'll definitely take it very seriously. Okay, the government will be the gatekeeper. I would like to ask about paragraph 4 of the LegCo brief. A few years back, we talked about the agents who recruited and placed seafarers. Then the seafarers should be given an opportunity to examine and seek advice on their employment agreements. So there was a difference between agents and non-agents. So after the amendment, the text has been modified so that for both agents and non-agents have to comply. Okay, other than this point, at the last subcommittee, were there anything different from this subcommittee's discussions? Well, most of them are textual amendments. Can you cite 1 or 2 examples? Well, in order to save time, can you give us 1 or 2 examples? Well, at that time, you thought that was a wrong word or what? Well, we look at the translated version. Please cite 1 or 2 examples. In the MLC, LN 174 Ship's Cox Convention. So in Chinese is 解释法证公约, and then in Chinese we deleted the word C. So we just try to align the English and Chinese version. Okay, so you don't need the word su. Okay, please cite another example. For LN 174, paragraph 21, that is about exceptions. It's page 0009. So it's called training conventions, and now we change it to training code. So where did this change come from? We follow the MLC because they have some Chinese versions of certain documents, so we just follow them. So at that time, why didn't you use that word? Oh, in English it's STCW code, but in Chinese we didn't use the word code 守則. So this time around, we just want to align it. And this is just an editorial amendment. We change it to 規則 instead of 公約. Is it because they changed the word, or what? Or you missed it? No, that was a matter of translation. A wrong translation at that time. Ms. Zhang? Well, actually, there were some mistakes. Well, STCW Convention and Code, they were two documents. So we take this opportunity to correct it. So at that time, there was a wrong translation. Yes, that was a textual problem. So it's not that they made a change and we make a change afterwards. Okay, I understand now. So members, these are just textual problems. I am sure our legal advisor has looked at all this. So can our legal advisor confirm that this is the case? That is about the agents and all the other details. You have already read them and everything's okay. Yes, I've read them and everything's okay. Any other questions? So the government will be the gatekeeper. So I hope that in 1 or 2 years' time you can give us some figures. How many inspections have you conducted? Have you done anything? Otherwise, after these pieces of legislation come into operation and then we wait forever to hear nothing. This is not normal. So I hope that you can tell us the enforcement situation after 2 to 3 years. Yes, that is fair. In the past, we have seen cases like this. So I think you have the responsibility to report back to us. So how long should it be? 1 to 2 years, maybe. So these will come into operation on the 20th of December. So maybe after 1 or 2 years' time, you can go to the, for example, Economic Affairs panel to report to us. So we are asking you to do that, okay?
So administration, please jot that down. And there is no need to raise questions again. So we'd like to have a progress report in a year's time because, well, I was asking for a progress report in a year's time because during the initial year, you might not have the concrete figures. So during the first 2 years, well, during the first and second year, so can we be given some figures? So please pass that on to the Economic Development Panel, and that would be fair enough. And then afterwards, if members would like to ask further questions, and if they'd like to get further progress reports, then they can ask for that again. So at least that serves as a reminder as to the commencement of the new legislation to us. Yes? The Secretary asked if we need to invite deputations to come. I don't think that's necessary. Okay, so what's the procedures? Do we need to extend the scrutiny period? Okay. Well, procedurally, we have already passed the deadline for giving or for reporting to the House. That's why. So for those who have not taken part in the subcommittee's work, they also should be given a chance to move amendments. So let's extend the scrutiny period. So when are we supposed to report to the House? So deadline for giving notice of amendment would be the 14th of November, and then expiry of the scrutiny period would be December the 12th, and then when are we going to report to the House? 30th of November, okay? Fine. Deadline for giving notice of amendment on or before the 5th of December. Okay, so administration, you are fully aware of that, okay? Any further things that we need to follow up on? All right, legal advisor, anything else? All right. So things are said and done. Thank you.
好，得知道。